What if Jon Snow, the enigmatic hero of Westeros, had chosen to claim the Iron Throne? This alternate path for Jon Snow would upend the story as we know it, reshaping the fate of the Seven Kingdoms and challenging the ideals that defined his character. Jon's journey to the throne would be fraught with complex political challenges, moral dilemmas, and the weight of his lineage, transforming him into a symbol of both hope and uncertainty in a war-weary world. For Jon to claim the Iron Throne, he would first need to embrace his Targaryen heritage. This alone would be a monumental shift in his identity. Raised as the illegitimate son of Eddard Stark, Jon's life was defined by his perceived status as an outsider. Learning of his true parentage as the legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark would have given him both a sense of belonging and a terrifying responsibility. Accepting this heritage, however, would not be simple. Jon's upbringing instilled in him a deep loyalty to the North and a disdain for the political intrigue of the South. His heart lay with the Stark ideals of honor and duty, which would clash with the Targaryen legacy of conquest and fire. For Jon to reconcile these two identities, he would need to recognize that leadership of the Seven Kingdoms demanded more than honor. It required pragmatism, a trait he often struggled to embody. One of the first hurdles in Jon's path would be winning the support of Westeros's fractured and war-torn nobility. By the time of Daenerys Targaryen's destructive sack of King's Landing, much of the realm viewed Targaryens with suspicion, if not outright hatred. Jon's reputation as a hero of the North and a slayer of the Night King might bolster his claim, but it would not erase the fear and mistrust that Daenerys's actions had sown. To gain the backing of key houses like the Lannisters, Baratheons, and Tyrells, or their remnants, Jon would have to prove that he was a ruler unlike his aunt. His northern allies, including Sansa Stark and Davos Seaworth, would play a critical role in this endeavor, navigating the delicate dance of diplomacy while Jon grappled with his own doubts. Jon's decision to claim the throne would inevitably lead to conflict with his Stark siblings. Sansa, fiercely independent and politically astute, might view Jon's Targaryen identity as a threat to northern independence. Arya, ever the free spirit, would likely reject the notion of her brother sitting on the throne, fearing that power might corrupt him as it did Daenerys. Bran, with his omniscient perspective as the three-eyed raven, might offer cryptic counsel, but his detachment from human affairs would make him an unreliable ally. These tensions would test the bonds of family and loyalty that Jon held dear, forcing him to confront the question of whether the Iron Throne was worth the cost of his relationships. Another critical element in Jon's rise to power would be his approach to governance. Unlike Daenerys, who ruled with an iron will and a fiery temper, Jon would likely strive for a more balanced and just rule. His experiences at the Wall and his time with the Free Folk taught him the value of understanding and compromise, traits that would shape his policies as king. He might seek to reform the feudal system, reducing the power of the great houses to prevent future conflicts. Such reforms, however, would not come without resistance. The lords of Westeros, many of whom clung to tradition, would see Jon's efforts as an attack on their privileges, setting the stage for rebellion and intrigue. Jon's Targaryen bloodline would also raise the issue of succession. As a man of honor, Jon might feel compelled to marry and produce an heir, but this decision would be fraught with complications. Who would he choose as his queen? A union with a powerful southern house like the Tyrells or Martells could strengthen his claim and bring stability to the realm, but it might also alienate his northern allies. Alternatively, Jon might forego marriage entirely, remaining true to his personal principles but leaving the question of succession unresolved. This uncertainty could lead to power struggles and chaos after his death, undermining the very stability he sought to create. As king, Jon would also face the lingering threat of external enemies. The Ironborn, ever restless under the rule of the mainland, might challenge his authority, seeking independence through rebellion. In the east, the remnants of Daenerys's loyalists could rally around another Targaryen claimant, reigniting the fires of war. Even the free folk, whom Jon had worked so hard to integrate, might prove difficult to manage, their fiercely independent nature clashing with the structured rule of the Seven Kingdoms. To maintain peace, Jon would need to balance strength with diplomacy, earning the respect of his enemies while avoiding the pitfalls of tyranny. Jon's inner turmoil would be another defining aspect of his reign. A man who never sought power, he would find himself burdened by the weight of the Iron Throne, questioning whether his actions were for the good of the realm or a betrayal of his true self. The memories of Daenerys and the Night King would haunt him, reminders of the cost of power and the fragility of peace. Yet, it is precisely this reluctance and self-awareness that might make Jon a better ruler than those who came before him. His understanding of sacrifice, forged in the fires of battle and loss, would guide him as he navigated the treacherous waters of kingship. In this alternate timeline, Jon Snow's claim to the Iron Throne would symbolize a new era for Westeros. Unlike the fiery conquest of his Targaryen ancestors or the ruthless machinations of the Lannisters, Jon's rise would be rooted in a desire to unite rather than divide. However, his rule would not be without its challenges. The scars of war would take generations to heal, and the threat of rebellion would linger as long as old grudges remained. Whether Jon could truly bring lasting peace to the Seven Kingdoms would depend on his ability to balance honor with pragmatism, compassion with strength, and tradition with progress. Jon Snow's story has always been one of duality: Stark and Targaryen, duty and love, life and death. By claiming the Iron Throne, he would embody the contradictions of his lineage and the complexities of leadership. His reign would not be defined by grand victories or fiery speeches, but by the quiet determination to do what was right, even when the cost was high. In the end, Jon Snow's decision to claim the throne would not only reshape the fate of Westeros, but also redefine the legacy of its most reluctant king. As Jon Snow's reign on the Iron Throne unfolded, his tenure would stand as a paradoxical blend of stability and turmoil. While his noble intentions and deep sense of responsibility endeared him to many, they also alienated others. Westeros, a realm scarred by war and political betrayal, would not easily adjust to a king who sought to rule by example rather than through fear or spectacle. Jon's leadership, marked by his quiet resolve and unshakable sense of duty, would force the realm to confront its own fractured identity while testing the limits of Jon's ability to lead a kingdom as diverse as it was divided. A key focus of Jon's reign would likely be the unification of the realm. His first acts as king might involve addressing the lingering tensions between the North and the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. The Northern Lords, fiercely loyal to Jon as a Stark and a man of the North, would expect him to champion their interests above all else. At the same time, the Southern Lords would view him as a Targaryen and demand policies that reflected their priorities. This duality of identity would force Jon to walk a tightrope, balancing his obligations to his northern roots with his responsibilities as the ruler of all Westeros. Sansa, now Wardeness of the North, could act as both an ally and a rival in this endeavor. Her political savvy and understanding of Southern culture would make her an invaluable advisor, but her fierce advocacy for Northern independence could create tensions between the siblings. To bring unity, Jon might undertake sweeping reforms to address the structural inequalities that had long plagued the realm. Inspired by his time with the Free Folk, Jon could push for more egalitarian policies, such as granting greater autonomy to smaller regions or loosening the grip of feudal lords over their vassals. These reforms, while well-intentioned, would undoubtedly provoke resistance from the aristocracy, many of whom would see them as a threat to their power and wealth. This resistance could manifest in subtle forms, such as political sabotage and economic pressure, or escalate into open rebellion. Jon, ever reluctant to shed blood unnecessarily, would be forced to navigate these challenges without compromising his principles or losing control of his kingdom. The question of justice would also loom large over Jon's reign. After the devastation wrought by Daenerys, many survivors in King's Landing and beyond would demand retribution for her actions. While Jon had already taken the painful step of ending Daenerys' life, the scars of her rule would linger, with factions either praising her as a liberator or condemning her as a tyrant. Jon would need to find a way to address these grievances while avoiding further bloodshed. A ruler of Jon's temperament might focus on reconciliation, establishing commissions to investigate abuses of power and compensate victims. However, such efforts would not appease everyone, and the potential for unrest would remain a constant undercurrent of his reign. Externally, Jon's ascension to the throne would shift the geopolitical dynamics of Westeros. His Targaryen lineage would give him a symbolic claim to territories beyond the Seven Kingdoms, such as Dragonstone and remnants of Daenerys' followers in Essos. While Jon himself might have little interest in expanding his rule, others could exploit his heritage to advance their own agendas. Loyalists to the Targaryen cause might rally around Jon as a unifying figure, pressuring him to assert his authority over former allies of Daenerys. Conversely, Jon's reluctance to embrace the more fiery aspects of his Targaryen identity might alienate these factions, creating new enemies where once there were allies. The role of dragons, or the absence of them, would be another significant factor in Jon's reign. As the last known Targaryen, Jon represented the end of a bloodline defined by its connection to these legendary creatures. Without dragons to enforce his rule, Jon's claim to power would rest entirely on his ability to inspire loyalty and command respect. This would set him apart from previous Targaryen monarchs, whose rule often relied on the awe and terror inspired by their draconic companions. Jon's kingship, therefore, would represent a departure from the old ways, signaling a potential shift toward a more human-centered form of governance. Amid these political and external challenges, Jon's personal life would inevitably shape his reign. A deeply introspective and private man, Jon would struggle to balance the demands of kingship with his own desires and beliefs. Marriage, a critical aspect of any monarch's legacy, would pose a particularly thorny issue for Jon. While a political alliance through marriage could strengthen his rule, it would also open him up to manipulation and betrayal. Jon's reluctance to marry for power rather than love might lead him to remain unwed, further complicating the question of succession. Without a clear heir, the stability of Jon's rule would be called into question, particularly by those who sought to exploit the uncertainty of the royal line. The idea of naming Sansa or Arya as his successor might appeal to Jon as a way to keep the throne within the Stark Targaryen family, but it would not resolve the underlying tensions between the North and the South. Alternatively, Jon might choose to leave the question of succession to a council or other form of collective decision-making, hoping to establish a precedent for future rulers to prioritize merit over bloodline. Such a move, however, would be unprecedented and likely provoke significant backlash. Throughout his reign, Jon's character would remain a defining element of his leadership. His innate sense of justice and fairness, combined with his experiences as a soldier and leader, would make him a compassionate and thoughtful ruler. However, these qualities would also be his greatest vulnerabilities. Jon's tendency to take the burdens of the realm upon himself would isolate him from his advisors and allies, leaving him vulnerable to manipulation and self-doubt. The specter of his past decisions, particularly the killing of Daenerys, would haunt him, shaping his perception of power and its potential for corruption. Ultimately, Jon's reign on the Iron Throne would be a study in contrasts. As a man who never sought power, he would bring a sense of humility and moral clarity to the role, earning the respect of those who valued integrity over ambition. Yet, his reluctance to embrace the more ruthless aspects of kingship would leave him vulnerable to the harsh realities of ruling a realm as complex as Westeros. In the end, Jon's legacy would not be defined by the grandeur of his achievements or the might of his armies, but by his enduring commitment to the ideals of justice, unity, and peace. Whether these ideals would be enough to sustain his rule and secure the future of the Seven Kingdoms would remain an open question, a testament to the challenges and contradictions of his extraordinary life.